How's it going, everybody? I'm glad you're here, and today we're going to be continuing on with our 1001 Films You Must See Before You Die retrospective. Today we're going to be talking about the year 1922. We have 5 films to talk about today, so we're going to dive right in. The first film we're going to be talking about is Foolish Wives by Eric von Streichen. The first 25 to 30 minutes of this film is actually pretty breathtaking. The sets and the costumes in this film are to the point where they don't feel like sets and costumes. They feel like real lived-in environments that somebody didn't even have to spend time setting up. It feels like something that was just placed there perfectly, meant for people to use. The costume design and the production design in this film is very much so off the charts. It's beautiful. And after that 30-minute mark, the allure of the costume design and the set design kind of wears off, and you start to realize that there's not a ton of substance in this film. This is a very long film for its subject matter. It's 2.5 hours long, and you really feel that runtime. And these characters are not interesting enough after a certain point in time to really get behind a lot of it. I really enjoyed the first half hour of this film because I also think the editing was very well done. The performances are very good, and I liked what they were setting up, but they don't wind up doing a whole much with it. So besides the set and the production design, there isn't a ton here to latch onto. And would I say this is something you have to see before you die? Not really. I don't have much of anything to say about this one besides what I already said, so we're just going to move on. The next film is Nosferatu by F.W. Murnau, one of the first of the classic monster series. This film is absolutely phenomenal in parts. The monster in this film is still terrifying. The cinematography is absolutely stunning. There's so many scenes of just tremendous blocking. There's beautiful framing in this film. There's wonderful costume design. There's wonderful makeup. There's incredible performances from everybody all around. The biggest issue that I had with this film, it's kind of my fault, and I should probably give this film a rewatch with this in mind. There's a lot less focus on the monster in this film than I thought there was going to be. That's not to say he's not in the movie, because he is. There's just a lot more focus on the romance, which I found to be significantly less interesting than the actual monster. The characters in these two romances, the man and this woman, are very interesting, and their romance isn't inherently not interesting. I just was wanting more of the monster whenever we cut back to the romance. The monster itself and his dynamic with the woman in this relationship was probably the most interesting part of the movie for me. It was just the husband was less interesting to me. I think that the production design in this film is once again off the charts, and I absolutely think this is something worth seeing before you die, because it definitely is one of the first OG great, as you could say, classic monster films, and it really set up an entire genre, and it is one of the most influential films of all time in the horror genre. We would not be where we are today without this film. I just think that you should probably manage your expectations as to how much fright you're gonna have and how much of this monster you're gonna have, because the monster is frightening, and there are plenty of scenes with him that are frightening. There's just not as much as I thought there was going to be. However, I think the good absolutely outweighs the bad here. I wouldn't call this film boring necessarily. I just think that if you don't have your expectations managed, I think you could be a little bit let down with how much of the horror aspect this film actually devotes its time to. Up next is Fritz Lang's Dr. Mabuse the Gambler. This film reminded me a lot of Les Vampires, which we talked about a few videos ago, because this is a 4.5 hour long film devoted up into 2 parts, or like 2 films combined into one really long film. And it doesn't need to be that long, in my opinion, at all. It should probably be about 2.5 hours instead of 4.5. And the first half is far more interesting than the second, because at the second half, it kind of feels like they're really beating a dead horse. The story at the beginning is very interesting, and there are a lot of characters with a lot of really good backstory and a lot of really good subplots. It seems like a really well done soap opera, kind of like how Les Vampires was. But once you get to that 2.5 hour mark, you start to wonder where the story's going, and it starts to meander, and it starts to not go anywhere at all, and the characters don't develop any further, so they become less interesting, and it just becomes a chore. And it's a shame, because the first 2 to 2.5 hours of this film are really cool. It's just the latter half gets very freaking boring very quickly. This is also the first of a series of films about the character of Dr. Mabuse, and I'm curious to see how those films hold up for me too, because the character is extremely interesting, and I would love to see more of this character, and the performances in this film are fantastic. I just think that this film was very much way too long, strung out for way too long, and it didn't need to be. Up next is the pioneering documentary film Nanook of the North. This film is kind of a documentary narrative film hybrid, and I'm not sure that the hybrid part of it always works very well. I was far more interested in the documentary portion of this film than I was the narrative story that they were trying to weave into. But overall, I think that this is a miracle, absolute miracle of a movie. There's a little bit of a behind-the-scenes story that kind of preludes the film and is kind of like a tail end of the film too. It appears at the very start and at the very end. And at the very end, it adds a very poetic kind of bookend Christmas bow to the story, because this was an incredibly difficult film to be made. And you don't have to do a lot of research to find that out. The film outright tells you a lot of the challenges that they had filming this, and I couldn't imagine making something like this easily in 2023, let alone 1922, over 100 years ago. The fact that this movie is even completed, let alone watchable, is outstanding. I think the photography in this film is absolutely breathtaking. You learn so much in such a short amount of time. I do think that this film is the perfect length. It's very short, and when you see a length like that for a documentary of this subject matter, you're wondering if that's not going to be enough time, but I think it absolutely was. I think if it was any longer, it would have overstayed its welcome, and if it were any shorter, you would have wanted to learn more. So I think that this is the perfect length for a film like this, and considering that the subjects in this film are non-actors, probably have never been near an actor in their life, probably have never seen more than 10 people outside of their family in their life, they give phenomenal performances in the narrative portion of the film. You get to see them build igloos and how they keep them afloat. You get to see them hunt for seals and how they use them for food, as well as coats and clothes. You get to see how the children interact. You get to see how the children interact with the animals. You learn so much in such a short amount of time, and it's a really beautiful story. So I highly, highly recommend this one. This is probably the film alongside Nosferatu that I would recommend the most out of this video. The next film we're going to talk about I would also recommend, but Nanook of the North especially, I think is a breathtaking watch, and it's very essential, necessary viewing. It's a revolutionary documentary and a revolutionary film, period. Even if there's some parts where you can kind of get a little bit bored, but that's not really the fault of the film. That's the fault of this film being 100 years old and having a lot of technical limitations. And I think that for the time, this is an absolute miracle of a movie, as I said. I highly recommend this one. Lastly, in this video, we're talking about Haxan by Benjamin Christensen. This film is very weird. It kind of functions as a documentary, but also an anthology film and also a narrative hybrid. It's also very darkly funny. There's serious aspects to it, but there's also a lot of comedy visually in this film. It follows parallels of witchcraft in the Middle Ages and how people were so terrified of that, as well as present day, as in present 1920s day psychiatric patients. It explores a lot of very unique things. And again, you learn a lot. The photography is beautiful. I will say that you're reading a lot of this film. This film almost functions as a visual novel, because the first 15 minutes of this film is pretty much just text over pictures that you're just reading. And obviously there's no narrator. So it can be a bit, I don't want to say tedious because it's only the first 10 to 15 minutes, but you're certainly wondering where it's going. You're wondering if that's going to be the whole film. And it's not the whole film, but a lot of the film is just text on a screen over pictures. And it makes sense, but you're also wanting a bit more of that narrative documentary hybrid. I will say the film is very funny. There's a lot of satanic imagery that's presented in a comical way, and it really, really works. You don't really think that could, but the film finds a very fine line between showing something that dark and exploring it humorously, and it never feels like it's betraying a certain tone, which I really, really liked. I don't have much to say about this one either, because it's so just unique, and it doesn't follow a lot of typical filmmaking tropes. It just teaches you quite a bit. And if you're open to learning about this kind of stuff, I think that this gives you a borderline encyclopedic level of knowledge. And it's far less of a traditional documentary or traditional anthology film or a traditional film in general as you would expect, because it's kind of a hybrid hodgepodge of all three things. And it manages to tackle all of them well. It's just so unique that it's hard for me to talk about without going into typical tropes, which this film doesn't do anyway. So I would definitely recommend this one too, because it's just such a unique beast and you learn a lot too. So I would recommend this one as well. Thank you guys so much, as always, for watching this video. I really love doing this series, and I really can't wait to do 1923. I can't promise it's going to be up soon, but it will be up eventually, and I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and I'll do them as long as I can stand doing them. So thank you so much for watching this video. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.